Hi there, I'm Gideon Rose, and welcome to another episode of Foreign Affairs Focus. We have the great pleasure today of being with Andy Nathan, who happens to be not just a professor at Columbia, but the author of the lead article in our new issue, How China Sees America, which is taken from his new book with Andrew Scobell, China's Search for Security.
Right.
Andy, this piece is about the world as viewed from Beijing. What does that world look like, and why is it different from what we sometimes assume?
We see Beijing as such a powerful, rising, aggressive, assertive power, but actually making policy in Beijing, the policymakers face all kinds of problems. They have a very complicated security environment, even within the country and around their borders. And every place they look, they see the United States looming up, projecting military power, economic power, ideological power, and threatening their security.
So is it fair to say that they're paranoid, but with good reason?
Even paranoids have enemies, as the saying goes. I think the U.S. is a huge presence all around the periphery of China. It's not a joke. The paranoid part may come from Chinese speculation about what the U.S. intends. We say we intend no harm. They're not so sure because they don't control their environment the way that we control our environment. Of course, nobody controls their environment completely, but the U.S. controls its environment to a considerable degree.
But the United States sees itself as being rather benign. We want to help the Chinese people. We're afraid of their government and trying to sort of make sure it doesn't do bad things. Why do they see us as aggressive?
I think there are three things. One is that it's never benign when somebody else has a tremendous amount of influence over your fate, even if they are good people. And a second thing is that we see the rise of China as threatening to us, even though they're over there in Asia and don't have any troops anywhere near us. And a third point is that not every piece of American policy toward China really is benign toward China. In particular, an area that I care a lot about, human rights and democracy promotion. I support American policy there, but let's face it, that policy intends to change the Chinese regime. I think that regime needs to be changed, even in the interests of China. When I say changed, I don't mean a revolution, a violent revolution, but changes need to happen. But the people who are running the Chinese regime want to completely decide on their own changes. They don't appreciate U.S. pressure to change in certain ways.
So when we see something like the case of the blind activists, we see them as being nasty and horrible, and they see us as being interfering and pushy.
They see us as snatching this guy off the streets of Beijing, spiriting him into the embassy, using a crisis situation to force them to treat one of their own citizens on their own territory the way we want that individual to be treated. It's quite intrusive from their point of view.
Okay, so what is the practical implication of this kind of empathy? If we understand how China sees the world, if everybody in Washington read your book and read your article and absorbed its lessons, how would they act differently?
Actually, I think our present policy, the Obama administration's policy, is about right. We're not calling for a different way for the administration to conduct its China policy. We do need to assert our interests. We do need to set boundaries for Chinese expansion. But I think we'd be better able, first of all, to communicate with them. And we might be more careful about some of the hot air that we ventilate in our presidential campaigns and in a lot of our rhetoric here, much of which reads in China as confirming their worst fears about what the U.S. long-term strategy is.
Well, it's interesting about that because there are all these calls on the right for a sort of tougher China policy and accusations that the White House is coddling Beijing in a variety of ways. But it sounds like from your piece, all the things that American hawks want the United States to do, the Chinese already assume we're already doing.
That's true, and as a matter of fact, we are doing most of those things. The rhetoric of the administration is soft on China is one that the out party, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, always uses against the incumbent White House. But our current policy is pretty tough. We're pursuing a tough human rights policy, as tough as any administration. We are pursuing a tough economic policy, which is hard because the Chinese are out competing us in a number of areas, but the Obama administration has filed a lot of trade cases against China with the World Trade Organization. And as you know, the Obama administration has announced a military pivot to Asia, which the Chinese find quite alarming.
Coming up this fall, leadership transition in China, is that going to be a big deal, or is it just yet one more set of gray technocrats running things in the same way?
I think from a foreign policy point of view, it's a big deal in the sense that the incoming, it's not a break, it is continuity, but it's a continuity in Chinese assertiveness in defending their own interests, because they are quite a confident, they are a rising power with a growing economy and growing global clout. The incoming leader, Xi Jinping, I read him as a very assertive guy who believes that we should be strong. So for example, we, China, So for example, now in the South China Sea, the Chinese have been in the last couple of years, been really patrolling and aggressively, or assertively is a better word, and asserting their interests that they claim there. And I think that policy already reflects the influence of Xi Jinping, not against other dissidents in the leadership, but his leading in that policy area. So I think the seas around China, the East China Sea, where they have a territorial dispute with Japan, and the South China Sea is going to be an area where you're going to see China continue to be very tough.
Mitt Romney just made a stir with comments about how culture influences economic development. Your last piece for us was about Confucian culture and its influence on politics and so forth in Asia. Is culture a dominant influence on the political and economic development in the region? And if so, does it have particular benefits for one country or another?
I do see culture as something that varies in the sense of values and norms that run a society, but I really don't think that culture explains either China's long period of economic stagnation or its current period of economic growth, or the reason why it has an authoritarian system, or nor does culture say China can't be democratic. So I think sometimes culture is kind of too easy of a slogan to give a one-word explanation for some huge outcome that's really caused by a bunch of other things, especially by power struggles among actors.
Okay, last question. We could do a ton, but there's just last time for one. The U.S. China relationship is probably the central relationship in the early 21st century in terms of the future of the world. Many people see it as heading for conflict. Is conflict inevitable, and are you optimistic or pessimistic about this in the decades to come?
Conflict is possible, and I think maybe small-scale conflicts, it depends on what you mean by the word conflict, certainly economic conflicts and so on, are inevitable. But I'm basically very optimistic. I think that China is, you spoke about culture a minute ago. I think that actually when Chinese and Americans get together and deal with various matters, they're very, very comfortable talking to one another. They can get on the same wavelength. I think China is over there, we're over here. That means that we aren't really rubbing up against each other in any very fundamental way. I think we share tremendous interdependency about the global economy, the global climate, all kinds of global issues, and there's a really good prospect, I think, that the two countries can forge a way to get along together.
As the saying goes, from your lips to God's ears. With that, Andy Nathan, How China Sees America in Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.